right, good afternoon. First of all, a few thank yous here. Thanks, Dee, for the introduction, and thanks for San Carlos for hosting ITC this year, and thank you as well to ITC and specifically Jim Erickson for the invite to this portion of the program and for twisting my arm to get me up here on the podium here. So I have the title here, From a Time Ball of Today Forward to Tomorrow. Perhaps a simpler title I could have just given it was Fire on the Yakama from 40,000 feet. Kind of somewhere between the view of the eagle and the view of the astronaut. I kind of like to give you a little rundown a little bit. But the story here is probably one that you're pretty familiar with, Fire in the West. And if you're familiar at all with the time ball, which, show of hands, anybody familiar with the time ball? Native women would record events using yarn and using beads or shells to record the different life events, to be able to tell to their daughters, their granddaughters and whatnot. And I kind of thought, well, what if we could kind of had a time ball that would tell us about Fire on the Yakama and where we've been, where we're going, and as we continue, how that time ball might form to where we're going. And so again, as you can see, I want to look at past fire history and practices, look at current management, and look forward to tomorrow and beyond. I do have 4 people that I brought with me virtually via video, and so I'll introduce those individuals when we get there. So there we are. All right, how many of you have had the opportunity to visit the Yakama Nation Reservation, or at least the central Washington portion of Washington, and are familiar? I understand many of you have either, if you're not working there currently, you may have worked there previously. It seems like a lot of forestry goes through Yakama, at least or a lot of you are familiar with Yakama, or perhaps you visited. And so you'll have an idea that I'm not talking about the Washington state that most people think of when they think of Seattle and they think of rain. I'm talking about the central portion where we can be just as dry as portions of here in Arizona. The Yakama Reservation is about 1.4 million acres. Over 10.8 million acres were ceded to the federal government in 1855 by treaty. Half the reservation is essentially woodland or forest, and about 400,000 acres of that is actively managed in forest. As I said, we do get a lot of sun, and we have a great variability in precipitation traveling with the elevation. As you increase in elevation from east to west, you also increase in precipitation. Anywhere from 7 inches, which is actually less than Tucson, Arizona, all the way up to over 100 inches on the crest. So you can also see there, that's Mount Adams in the background there, known to Yakamas as Pato. That's the western edge of the reservation at over 12,000 feet. So again, moving quickly for time, as you can see, the green area in the inset map there is the administrative forest. And as you can see, as I previously mentioned, the kind of the precipitation gradient there. So if we get into the heart of the discussion here to talk about fire on the Yakama, as in many places in the West, things have changed drastically over from historic conditions. So starting with historic conditions, again with elevation, and I'm talking now, continuing on just specific to the forested portions of the Yakama Reservation. We have a transitional gradient from oak woodlands, pine, open pine stands, ponderosa pine, pine fir, mixed conifer, true fir, subalpine fir, all the way up to subalpine. And those historically were within, of course, their natural range of variability, with also human influence as far as the fire regime and fire intensities. Anything from in the ponderosa pine, a return interval of 5 to 15 years, to in the subalpine for 250 plus more a year for a return of fire. So if you just kind of look there, my two pictures there in the upper left there, kind of what we're seeing in the ponderosa pine, really low intensity fire, and then the lower right there, historic photo actually, of a subalpine area not long following fire, where it's pretty much has taken out the subalpine fir component at that time. So of course, if you know me, I gotta throw a slide in here about huckleberries. But this slide is signifying that fire, whether indirectly or directly, has great influence over the resources of the Yakama Reservation that are very important to the Yakama people, and not just huckleberries, but many other berries, roots, herbs, medicines. Forage for ungulates, deer and elk, you can go on and on and on. We can make the case that fire plays an important role in soil health, which translates to water, which translates to salmon, and you name it. All right, here, so before we get a video started here, again, like I mentioned, I want to introduce a few people that you'll see in these videos. They will have their, be identified, but we have 4 different individuals you'll be seeing throughout these videos. Gerald Lewis, who is currently on our tribal council. Max Corpus, a former tribal councilman and a longtime fire management officer here at Yakama. Don Jones, the current fire management officer, and Ryan Sanchi, the current assistant fire management officer. And as you watch these videos, I kind of want you to pay particular attention about how their background and the position that they currently or former held might give a perspective to how they respond to the questions or comments that they're making.
Historically, how fire has affected the Yakama Reservation. This has gone way back.
Well, I can go back 25 years, you know.
Well, if you go way back in history, you know, fire basically it pretty much regulated the species composition and stand density, you know, and kept everything in check.
The elders of the Yakama Nation have commented that areas within the traditional root digging areas, they burned these off to create a better crop of roots.
In the early years, when the reservation became the reservation and our people used to roam the lands to collect their foods, especially when they would go to the mountains and gather the huckleberries and the berries up there throughout the year. And when it came time to leave, they would start fires and they would burn the brush.
And this was also done in the huckleberry fields, opening up areas for the plants to thrive, to receive sunshine needed for growing.
So that they would replenish them for the next year. This was done so that they found that fire was a good way to, I guess, repopulate the bushes for the berries.
When I first started, we were having some pretty good sized fires in lake beds and Clicktack complex, and you know, 25 years later, we've had Mile Marker 28 and Cougar Creek and some other smaller ones in between. You know, it used to be good for the reservation. It used to keep everything in check by low intensity underburns. You know, it kept all the ugly stuff out. But now it's burning hotter. You know, it's destroying not only the ugly stuff, but all the good stuff too, like the big timber. So
Years ago, the introduction of prescribed fire was not very receptive on the reservation here. Because of the fact that, comment was made that, what happens if the prescribed burn gets away, we're going to lose timber and whatnot. But, with the introduction of prescribed burning and the creation of the fuels management program, slowly the Yakama Nation accepted the fact that, prescribed burning is an asset to the forest.
Throughout the years, they also found out that the burning of the underbrush around the trees helped for the trees to grow and prosper. This was a very good, to impact not only the trees and the wildlife that historically roamed through the area, the deer, the elk, and also the other animals, but also the birds. So it played a very significant role throughout the years, fire.
So just a quick recap of that video. As you've seen, Ryan, the AFMO, was talking about species composition and stand density. Gerald and Max were talking about the roots and the berries. And both Don and Gerald were talking about the benefits of low intensity fire that was within the historic variability. So moving on to current conditions. Current conditions are departed from historic. Fire regimes and condition classes are altered. What are those reasons for changes? There's a number of reasons for changing: past grazing practices, past silvicultural and harvest practices that resulted in partial or full species conversions. And of course, the one that we can talk about for quite some time is fire suppression policy. The whole Smokey Bear and all fires out by 10 a.m. the next morning. I believe in Indian country that Smokey Bear has done a great disservice. I think we should actually put a couple eagle feathers in his cap and change his tune. He can still teach wildfire prevention to the kids, but he also needs to teach that the big kids are supposed to play with matches. Results from fire suppression: overstocking of stands, stress due to lack of water, limited water availability, insect vulnerability, susceptibility, infestations, and just increasing the fire susceptibility. It's a self-feeding cycle. Suppress fire, end up with more fire. I think we're all starting to see that, especially what some of the other speakers have talked about. Fortunately at Yakama, we've had for quite some time, long before I came, and I think long before even some of my mentors came, we've had a very active forestry program at Yakama. Whether it's thinning for pre-commercial timber stand improvement or also now for fuels reduction. Experimental treatments that we've tried, and a lot have failed than succeeded, but at least, if you don't try, you can never succeed. Timber harvest, whole tree harvesting with landing pile disposal has been a very helpful tool in being able to reduce the impacts of fuel loading from fire suppression. And prescribed fire itself, whether it's underburning, jackpot burning, hand pile burning, or machine pile burning. And whether it's been actively managed indirectly or directly for fire, management does have an impact on how fire will behave across the landscape. So I know when I came to Yakama, I've been in the valley since 1994. That also happened to be the year that everyone talked about until 2013. In 1994, we had both the Lake Beds complex at over 6,600 acres and the Klickitat complex at over 5,000 acres. It was a big fire year in Washington State. Secretary of Interior Bruce Babbitt at the time actually visited Yakama Reservation during those complexes. Again, it was 1994, the one that was always referred to. That was the year. Remember 1994 was kind of one of the mottos in the fire program at Yakama. And then in 2013, as Don Jones, the FMO, mentioned in the video, was the mile marker 28 fire. It far eclipsed the previous fires in 1994 as far as large fire. Almost 20,000 acres of that was on the Yakama Reservation. And I guess we were wishful thinking. I don't think we had our heads under a rock. But we were hoping that perhaps mile marker 28 might be the defining fire of our careers. But that was not to be the case this last year in 2015. Stuff happens. We had the Cougar Creek fire. Over 53,000 acres, over 47,000 acres of that was on the Yakama Reservation. It's now by far the largest fire recorded on the reservation. 2015 was a very exceptional year in the state of Washington for fires. It's the largest fire season that the state has ever seen. Unfortunately, Yakama, Colville, Spokane, I'm not sure other reservations experienced part of that. And so as you can see, even with a very active management program, we are not immune.
Currently, 2016, I would say fire plays the role of villain.
Right now, we have a put everything out policy. So the only role it plays on the reservation right now is it's providing employment.
It's bad. We've had, 2 large fires in 3 years and 1 billion board feet of loss of commercial volume. I think, it seemed as bad here, and when it's a tribe that's geared towards timber and timber resources, and, fire has been consuming a lot of those in the last short period of time. I think it, plays the role of villain, has a negative impact on the landscape, just looking at it from 2016's view.
Currently, the role that fire plays on the Yakama Reservation is the fact that we have a lot of, dying trees due to the bug infestations that we have on the reservation. And with the fires that come through, especially lightning caused or even man-made caused, that they take out these trees that are infested, and it also kills the bugs that are in the trees, so that we can maintain the healthy trees that are surviving.
All right, just again a quick recap. Ryan AFMOs, currently sees fire as a villain, and perhaps justly so after the last 3 seasons. But there is some benefit, as Gerald was pointing out, the tribal councilman, he can see that big picture. All right, so where is this all going to take us? What direction are we headed? We obviously have to continue to protect the resources. The foods, the medicines, the water, very important, as well as the timber provides jobs and revenue to the tribe. But we also have to continue to look out and look at more in depth. Where are we at with climate change? How are we going to address that? And is it pretty much staring us in the face? We can't avoid it. And are large fires going to be the new norm? How do we adapt and change with that? So how should we mitigate these issues? It looks like we kind of need to take an approach that incorporates just about everything. An integrated approach, an interdisciplinary approach, interagency approach, planning ahead with fire potential in mind. It's not that we haven't been, but it looks like we need to be even more proactive and can no longer be in a reactive mode. In other words, we have to look at what do we want our future to look like. I put this slide up here. Obviously, it's two different pictures. But I guess what I want to point out with that is when we look into the hills, we look in the mountains, and we see smoke, I like to think that at some point we can get back to those historic conditions. That's what the tribe, the goal is. That's what the forest management plan says, is we want to restore to our historic conditions. And so we see that smoke in the air in the top picture there. We can hopefully think that it's going to be this, if it is in a ponderosa pine stand, that we're seeing this natural surface, low intensity fire. And how are we going to do that? We need to manage with the best available science, but also use the traditional knowledge that is still available and before it's gone. And continue to adapt. Fire has been here, is here, and will remain a major component shaping the landscape. This necessitates an active and adaptive management loop with continuous feedback.
In the future, how will fire affect the Yakama Reservation? The primary concern is protection of the Yakama Nation resources: the water, the foods, the medicines, the timber, fisheries, and wildlife. Loss of timber due to a major fire conflagration severely affects the trust income of the Yakama Nation, which is received through logging. Now, unfortunately, you have no control over Mother Nature.
With climate change that is around us, especially with the water, and the impacts to water, and the reservation is at its driest. And this past winter has changed that. We've had a lot of snow up in the mountains and a lot of wet weather days, and so that we are going to have a very good runoff of water, but this is only 1 year, and also the impacts of the dry weather is going to affect our trees, our grounds, our grasses, and all the foods that the people rely on that grow up there in the closed area.
I think the future is kind of, we got a snapshot of it in the last couple of years. It's these large campaign fires are going to be the new norm.
If we don't start strategically coming up with some projects that are going to help us fight fire, it's going to be pretty hard for us to manage fire.
Longer fire seasons, an aging workforce, less resources available nationally.
We should sit down together, all programs, and discuss tactics, whether it's logging, thinning, prescribed burning. We need to sit down together and come up with a plan and look at these areas that are most likely going to catch on fire, and not only catch on fire, but are these areas going to burn hot? Are they going to get up and go real fast? Those are the areas we should probably be concentrating on doing some type of treatment.
Again, a recap. We're going to have to continue to protect our resources, planning for that, planning for climate change, realizing that perhaps these large fires might become the norm that we'll have to address, and putting all options on the table to do so. How are we going to get there? How do we put this all together? How does this carry out in the real world? That's where most of us work. It looks like that we're going to have to continue to pursue partnerships and collaboratives and partner with neighboring agencies, share and compare notes with others like we're doing here at this conference. Most all of us have a shared goal, and that's managing the land. I know we all do here. A lot of partnerships are being enacted and at the tipping point with many more in the works. Again, huckleberries are always on my mind, and the picture here shows a project that we did perhaps already 5 years ago with the neighboring national forest in the huckleberry area. So, we're presented with an unavoidable opportunity. It's maybe kind of a juxtaposition or oxymoron, but if large fires are to happen, are we going to make lemonade? In other words, we can see them as good, bad, but perhaps it's somewhere in between, or maybe all of the above. Objectively, the facts are the facts. What we have is what we have. But subjectively, it varies a great deal on your point of view. We cannot control Mother Nature, Creator, God, or however you want to reference, but we can manage to reduce risk and hazards. Will large fires still likely happen? Yes. But the need to adapt and live with fire has and will not change, but how we continue to adapt to a changing environment is key. And I believe that that's one of the greatest strengths of Native people, has always been able to adapt to no matter what's been given them.
How should management handle the increased risk of fire? I think management needs to look at large sub-basin or landscape type projects that, HFR projects, roadside projects, and even maybe some forestry projects that are geared from the suppression standpoint, so that if we are going to be, the new norm is large fires, then we've already kind of got our boxes built and we've got a landscape that is fire resilient, or to the standpoint of not having such huge losses during these fires.
This is a key to not only to forestry, but also to our wildlife and to our fisheries. So it's very detrimental when all these are not taken into consideration.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attendance.